Welcome back, everybody. These are the best horror films of 1981. We're going to check out every single horror film that was released in the year 1981. There'll be some foreign, domestic, drive-ins, movie theaters, you name it, TV, whatever horror movies came out for the year 1981. We're going to check them out and see what was scaring audiences worldwide. All right? I'm Tony. Thanks for joining me. Let's check out now the best horror films of 1981. A Day of Judgment. In the 1920s, a man in black rides into a small southern town to visit retribution upon the citizens who have strayed from the path of righteousness. Slasher, horror, drama, and horror. Absurd. A priest doctor chasing a man with supernatural regenerative abilities who has recently escaped from a medical lab reaches a small town where the mutant goes on a killing spree. B horror, slasher horror. Allison's Birthday. A young girl is subjected to a reign of terror so that her soul can be transferred to the body of an old crone. Allison's Birthday. Horror and mystery. An American Werewolf in London. American college students David Kessler and Jack Goodman on a walking tour in Britain are attacked by a werewolf that none of the locals will admit even exists. Body horror, horror. Bewitched. While possessed by an evil spirit, a man murders his daughter. A police detective investigating the case also becomes possessed. Crime, horror, and thriller. Bewitched. Next up we have is The Black Cat. A professor with the psychic ability to communicate with the dead uses his powers on his pet cat in order to take vengeance upon his enemies. The Black Cat. Horror. This movie will not disappoint. Bloody Parrot. An expert swordsman is suspected of being the thief of a treasure sent to Emperor. The swordsman, who has nothing to do with the theft, investigates and is led on the trail of the supernatural Bloody Parrot. Bloody Birthday. 3 children are born at the height of an eclipse of the sun. 10 years later, they begin to murder the people around them, even their family members. Bloody Birthday. Slasher, horror, and horror. Bloody Moon. Girls are killed at a language school in Spain. Slasher, horror, and horror. Bloody Moon. This movie is good, a lot of jump scares and kills. It will not disappoint. Burial Ground, The Night of Terror. An archaeology professor discovers an ancient crypt which contains living dead corpses. The zombies go on a rampage and attack a group of people. Body horror and horror. Burned at the Stake. In 1692 in Salem, Massachusetts, young Ann Putnam accuses several residents of being witches. Horror. Burned at the Stake. This movie will not disappoint. Cannibal Terror, again with the cannibals. After botching a kidnapping, 2 criminals hide with their victim in a friend's house in the jungle. After one of them rapes the friend's wife, they're left to be eaten alive by nearby cannibal tribes. Cannibal Ferox. 3 friends set out to disprove cannibalism on a trip to the Amazonian jungle, where they meet 2 men trying to escape vicious cannibal tribe. Alright, so far we have zombies and cannibal movies in 1980-81, and the beginnings of slasher films. Corpse Mania. A necrophiliac killer is murdering the prostitutes, hookers, and sluts at Madame Land's brothel. Corpse Mania. Slasher horror. Dark Night of the Scarecrow. In a small southern town, 4 vigilantes wrongfully execute a mentally challenged man. But after the court sets them free, mysterious accidents begins killing them off one by one. This movie is creepy and good. Dawn of the Mummy. A group of fashion models disturb the tomb of a mummy and revive an ancient curse. Horror. Dawn of the Mummy. If you like mummies and revenge, you'll love Dawn of the Mummy. The Day of the Triffids. When a comet blinds nearly everyone in the world, a genetically engineered species of plant takes over. Horror, sci-fi, and thriller. The Day of the Triffids. This movie is a scorcher. Dead and Buried. Sheriff Dan Gillis investigates eerie deaths in a sleepy coastal town. Horror and mystery. Dead and Buried with James Ferrantino and Jack Albertson. Deadline. A popular horror writer whose family life is falling apart struggles to write his next horror movie. Drama, horror, and thriller. Deadline. If you only see one horror film this year, don't miss Deadline. Deadly Blessing. After her husband dies under mysterious circumstances, a widow becomes increasingly paranoid of the neighboring religious community that may have diabolical plans for her. Delusion. A nurse goes to a house to care for a crippled old man. Then people in the house start being murdered. Slasher horror. Notice how they use the word crippled? So when you were handicapped or incapacitated, physically challenged, you were called a cripple. Cripples. Don't go in the woods. 4 friends camping in the woods inadvertently stumble upon the domain of a maniacal killer. Don't go in the woods. Slasher horror. We love slasher. Remember, slasher started beginning in 1980. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Miss Osborne. In 19th century London, a sex maniac sneaks into the engagement party of Dr. Henry Jekyll and Miss Fanny Osborne. Horror and sci-fi. The Night of the Werewolf. An evil witch brings back to life the infamous Elizabeth Bathory, who was executed several hundred years previously for murdering young women and bathing in their blood. The Night of the Werewolf. Horror. The Evil Dead is a stunning, good movie. 5 friends travel to a cabin in the woods, where they unknowingly release flesh-possessing demons. The Evil Dead will not disappoint. Evil Speak. An outcast military cadet taps into a way to summon demons and cast spells on his tormentors through his computer. Psychological horror and horror. Evil Speak. Eyes of a Stranger. Slasher horror. A news anchorwoman begins to suspect a man living in the same apartment complex as her to be the serial killer that's been raping and killing women in the Miami area. Eyes of a Stranger. The Fan. Douglas, a record salesman, is an obsessive fan of actress Sally Ross. When his letters are rejected, he strikes out at her and her loved ones. The Fan. Fear no evil. High school student turns out to be a personification of Lucifer. 2 archangels in human form, as women, take him on. Fear no evil. Final Exam. A psycho killer shows up on college campus to slash up pretty co-eds and dumb jocks. Final Exam. This movie is great. If you love Friday the 13th and Halloween and slasher movies, you'll love this movie. Frankenstein Island. When a hot air balloon crashes on a remote island, the crew discovers Dr. Frankenstein's ancestor carrying on the family work, along with a race of mutants and a population of Amazons. Friday the 13th Part 2. 5 years after the events of the first film, a summer camp next to the infamous Camp Crystal Lake is preparing to open, but the legend of Jason is weighing heavy on the proceedings. Friday the 13th Part 2. Full Moon High. A popular high school football player becomes a werewolf after a trip to Romania and struggles to come to terms with his new reality. Dark comedy, parody, satire, and horror. Full Moon High. The Funhouse. We love the Funhouse. Teenage Amy Harper, her boyfriend Buzz, and their friends visit a local carnival for a night of innocent amusement, but soon witness a fortune teller's murder and find that the exits are locked. This movie's scary and good. A Galaxy of Terror. A ragtag spaceship crew sent on a rescue mission encounter a formidable enemy, their worst fears projected by their own imaginations. Galaxy of Terror. Ghost Story. 2 generations of men find themselves haunted by the presence of a spectral woman. When the son of one of the elderly men returns to his hometown after his brother's mysterious death, they attempt to unravel the story. Ghost Keeper. 3 friends on a New Year's Eve snowmobiling excursion find themselves stranded at an abandoned lodge where the elderly female innkeeper is concealing a sinister secret. The Ghost Keeper. Graduation Day. A mass killer begins murdering students on the school track team after a track runner dies upon completion of a 30-second 200-meter race. Slasher horror. We love these movies. Halloween 2. While Dr. Loomis hunts for Michael Myers, a traumatized Laurie is rushed to Haddonfield Memorial Hospital, and the Shape is not far behind her. This movie was awesome. It scared everybody. Halloween 2. Happy Birthday to Me. Another slasher horror. At the snobby Crawford Academy, Virginia's group of friends start to go missing years after horrible events that happened to her as a child around her birthday. Happy birthday to me. Hell Night. We love Linda Blair. 4 college fraternity and sorority pledges spend the night in a deserted old mansion as part of a hazing ritual during Hell Night. Slasher horror. If you love slashers, you'll love Hell Night. Home Sweet Home. Slasher horror. So basically we got now the beginning of slashers. An escaped mental patient steals a station wagon. Halloween, remember Halloween? And makes his way to the Bradleys' Thanksgiving celebration, where he plans to make them a little less thankful. Oh, I love it. I love it. The House by the Cemetery. A New England home is terrorized by a series of murders, unbeknownst to the guests that a gruesome secret is hiding in the basement. Oh, The House by the Cemetery. These movies of the 80s were the best, I'm telling you. Inseminoid. A crew of interplanetary archaeologists is threatened when an alien creature impregnates one of their members, causing her to turn homicidal and murder them one by one. Jaws of Satan. A preacher whose ancestors were cursed by druids battles Satan, who has taken the form of a huge snake. Jaws of Satan. This movie is scary and it's a scorcher. Just Before Dawn. 5 young people venture into the backwoods of Oregon to claim a property and find themselves being stalked by a hulking, machete-wielding psychopath. Slasher horror thriller. So 1978 was Halloween with the slashers. That started it all. Kiss Daddy Goodbye. 2 children who have psychic powers use them to avenge the death of their father, who was murdered by a biker gang. Kiss Daddy Goodbye. Kung Fu Zombie. A criminal comes to town in order to kill Billy Chong over a past dispute. Action, comedy, and horror. Kung Fu Zombie. You love zombie films? You'll love Kung Fu Zombie. It has it all. Monster of Frankenstein. Animation. Japanese animated adaptation of Marvel's The Monster of Frankenstein comic book series. Monster of Frankenstein. If you love horror and animation, you'll love this. Lady Stay Dead. A young woman is looking after her sister's house, unaware that her sister and neighbor have been murdered by their handyman, who also happens to be a serial killer. Drama, horror, and thriller. The Beyond. A young woman inherits an old hotel in Louisiana, where following a series of supernatural accidents, she learns that the building was built over one of the entrances to hell. The Beyond. The Loch Ness Horror. An increasing number of people are dying mysterious deaths in the dark waters of Loch Ness. Monster horror, adventure, and horror. The Loch Ness Horror for the Loch Ness Monster. If you love Loch Ness Monster, you'll love this movie. The Last Shark. James Francois tries to save hundreds of swimmers in a coastal resort after a great white shark starts terrorizing the area. The Last Shark. Pretty much like a Jaws ripoff, but it's supposed to be good. Macumba Sexual. Princess Obongo, the goddess of unspeakable lust, uses dark powers to ensnare a hapless couple of yuppies. Horror, mystery, and romance. Macumba sexual. Madhouse slasher, another slasher. A woman is pursued by her murderous psychopathic twin sister in the days leading up to their birthday. Madhouse. Madman. Madman, a legendary psychopathic murderer, stalks a summer camp. Madman. B-horror, slasher horror. We love slasher films, and they're all the rage in 1980 and 81. Told you the 80s are picking up. Midnight Offerings. Vivian has magic powers. She doesn't hesitate to save her boyfriend David from failing in school by murdering teachers. Midnight Offerings horror. We love this movie. Murder Syndrome. A scandal from Michael's past emerges when he visits his mother's house with the director and others from a recent film project. Again, slasher, horror, and mystery. We love slasher films. My Bloody Valentine. Slasher horror. A decades-old folktale surrounding a deranged murderer killing those who celebrate Valentine's Day. Suspense, mystery, horror, slasher horror. This movie is awesome. Mystery on Monster Island. A young man and his traveling buddy embark on a global journey on board their ship, only to be shipwrecked on a desolate island teeming with prehistoric creatures. Adventure, comedy, and horror. Mystics in Bali. A woman researches a book that takes her to the black magic cult of Leek in Bali. She meets an evil witch who promises to train her dark arts. Folk horror, horror, and thriller. Mystics in Bali. Night of the Zombies. Investigators search for soldiers, missing bodies, and hear unbelievable rumors about zombies. Horror and sci-fi. Night of the Zombies. So what do you think about 1981 so far? It's a scorcher. Night School. Who's been decapitating the innocent girls at a local night school? The police are baffled. What's it say? It says slasher horror. We love slasher horrors. They're all the rage of 1981. There's more slasher horrors in 81 than 1980. Nightmare. Slasher horror. A mental patient embarks on a murder spree upon escaping from an institution. You'll notice that a lot of people that love horror films, they love slasher films. The Nightmare Man. Remember Halloween 4? It was a Nightmare Man. A lonely Scottish island is stalked by a brutal killer who may be from another world. I always remember that phrase. It was a Nightmare Man. I think it was Halloween 4 or Halloween 5 where little Jamie said that. The Final Conflict. The now adult Antichrist plots to eliminate his future divine opponent while a cabal of monks plot to stop him. The Final Conflict. The Omen. Damien. Pickman's Model. Inspired by Lovecraft's short story, Pickman's Model is about a morbid painter named Richard Uptown Pickman who created from his fiendish brush unbelievable killings. Pickman's Model. Piranha 2, The Spawning. A scuba diving instructor, her biochemist boyfriend, and her police chief ex-husband try to link a series of bizarre deaths to a mutant strain of piranha fish. Horror, sci-fi, and thriller. Piranha 2. Possession. Supernatural horror. A woman starts exhibiting increasingly disturbing behavior after asking her husband for a divorce. Suspicions of infidelity soon give way to something much more sinister. Possession. Road Games. Mystery thriller. A laid-back American truck driver in South Australia begins to suspect that a man driving a green van is killing young women. Road Games. Mystery thriller. Roar. A naturalist living with big cats in East Africa expects a visit by his family of 4 from Chicago. A mix-up leaves him searching for his family who have been left in the clutches of wild lions. Roar. Saturday the 14th. Vampire horror parody. A family inherits an old mansion which houses the dangerous Book of Evil that has all the monsters of the world trapped inside it. This movie is hilarious. You'll love it. Savage Harvest. adventure, horror, and thriller. A family in Africa finds itself under attack by a pride of lions. Savage Harvest, if you love wild kingdoms, Africa, wild animals, you'll love this movie. Scanners, one of the best films of horror. A scientist trains a man with an advanced telepathic ability called scanning to stop a dangerous scanner with extraordinary psychic powers from waging war against non-scanners. Scream, the original Scream. A group of friends on a rafting trip down a river stop in an old ghost town to spend the night. Slasher horror. Scream. This is the original Scream. Strange Behavior. A scientist is experimenting with teenagers and turning them into murderers. Slasher horror. Teen horror and horror. Remember 1980-81 was all about cannibals? Now we're into slasher horror. Student Bodies. A serial killer with his signature heavy breathing proceeds to systematically kill the students and teachers of Lamab High School. Slasher horror. We love slasher horrors. We love it. Suddenly, in the dark, a wife starts to suspect her husband's infidelity after the arrival of their new young housekeeper, who carries a mysterious wooden doll with herself. Suddenly, in the dark. Sobrenatural. The undesirable husband of a woman, after passing away, returns in spirit form to continue harassing and mistreating her. Sobrenatural. Horror. This movie is Scorcher. Next thing we have is The Survivor. When an airline pilot survives a crash that kills all 300 passengers, he works with a psychic and a priest to find the culprit behind the incident and pacify the souls of the victims. The Appointment. A British horror film that starts with a bang, then settles into a slow-moving examination of one day in the life of a British family, a day full of tension and foreboding. The Appointment. The Burning. It burns. It burns. Abusive former summer camp caretaker Crosby, horribly burned from a prank gone wrong 5 years earlier, lurks around upstate New York summer camps for revenge. The Hut. An attractive young woman has been called on to help rid a haunted family of its demons. The male heirs all die young. Drama, horror, and mystery. The Hut. Originally called BMAC. That's called BMAC. The Other Hell. Nuns become possessed by the devil and lust after the abbot. Horror, mystery, and thriller. The Other Hell. I believe this is an Italian movie. That's called The Other Hell. Feng Kulu. Know what this is about? Be the first to add a plot. Feng Kulu is about skulls, killings, and the death coming back for revenge. Feng Kulo. This movie's called Feng Kulo. The Devil's Game. This is fantastic stories of the 19th century. The Devil's Game. A television teamwork of Mario and Lamberto about an old French myth. The Devil's Game. The Venus of Isle. A wealthy landowner uncovers a bronze statue of Venus on his property. He asks an antique expert to examine the statue and confirms its wealth. And it's possessed. Next thing we have is The Being. A mutated creature is wreaking havoc in a small town in Idaho. A police chief and a government scientist team up to save their rural town from its menace. The Being. The Boogans. We love the Boogans. Otherworldly creatures are released from the bootleg tunnels underneath a small town mining community and begin chomping on the locals. The Boogans. We love the Boogans. The Hand. A comic book artist loses his hand, which in turn takes on a murderous life of its own. It has a life of its own. Maybe you should get a life of your own before it's too late. The House by the Cemetery. A New England home is terrorized by a series of murders, unbeknownst to the guests that a gruesome secret is hiding in the basement. The House by the Cemetery. Fue la vila acentando el cementerio. That's the original title. The Howling. After a bizarre and near deadly encounter with a serial killer, a television newswoman is sent to a remote mountain resort whose residents may not be what they seem. The Howling. This movie has a very sad ending. The Monster Club. A writer of horror stories is invited to a monster club by a mysterious old gentleman. There, 3 gruesome stories are told to him. Between each story, some musicians play their songs. The Nesting. A writer suffering from agoraphobia rents an isolated house so she can concentrate on her writing. She doesn't know that the house is a former brothel and is inhabited by the ghosts of dead prostitutes, hookers, and sluts. The Orchid and Murder. Charkha's Green, Kent, 1966. Pauline Cox accompanies Mike Robbins to a village cricket match in which he is playing but becomes bored and wanders away for revenge. The Prowler. An unknown killer clad in World War II U.S. Army fatigues stalks a small California town bent on reliving a 35-year-old double murder. Slasher horror. This movie is good. The Territory. A small group of well-to-do vacationers go on a hiking trip into the woods. Foolishly unprepared to deal with Mother Nature and their situation, they wander around lost for days and weeks. The Territory. Dark comedy, drama, and horror. The Unseen. 3 female reporters find themselves staying overnight in a house occupied by a hostile being that lurks in the basement. The Unseen. Slasher horror. The Pit. A solitary and strange preteen boy wreaks revenge on his harassers when he makes a disturbing discovery in the depth of a forest. The Pit. Horror and mystery. This House Possessed. After having a nervous breakdown, a rock singer has to spend some time in the hospital. A private nurse is hired, and with her, he buys a new house, a fanatic house in the country. But it's possessed. Crime, horror, and thriller. Toro. A lawnmower goes on a rampage. So this is a lawnmower that becomes cursed by the devil and goes on a rampage. Toro. Wolf Hour. Anna and Tom live in a remote place while Anna suffers from depression after an abortion and is afraid of losing Tom's affection. An admirer of Tom's writing, Eleanor, adds to the problem when she appears with a tame wolf. Venom. Terrorists in the process of kidnapping a child get trapped in a house with an extremely deadly snake. Venom. This movie is scary with a lot of jump scares. You'll love it. Violence and Flesh. 3 criminals escape from prison and break into a seaside house to wait for the getaway boat. They subdue 4 aspiring actresses and 3 men and rape and torture them. Violence and Flesh. Wolfen. A New York cop investigates a series of brutal deaths that resemble animal attacks. Horror thriller. This movie is also good with a lot of jump scares. Wolfen. And lastly we have is Zombie Lake. In a small village somewhere in France, German soldiers killed and thrown into the lake by the resistance during World War II come back. Zombie horror and horror. Zombie Lake will not disappoint. Those were the best horror films of 1981. What were some of your favorite films of that year? Now remember, the 80s was entirely different from the 70s, obviously, as were the 60s and 50s. But focusing on the 80s, what I noticed from 1980 and 81, very few slashers in 1980, heavily with the cannibal movies. Remember the cannibals? A lot of cannibal movies were made in 1980 and 81. But slasher films, I'm going to use, I guess you could say, what's that, the movie that came out, Black Christmas. I think that came out in 1974. That's a slasher film. So I would say Black Christmas in 74, and then, or 76. It was 74 or 76. But the true slasher film was going to be Halloween in 78. So I didn't find that many in 79. But 1980, when you had Friday the 13th, 1981, you had Friday the 13th Part 2. You had a lot of, as I mentioned here, a lot of slasher films in 1981. What were some of your favorite films, horror films of 1981? What's your favorite type of horror films? You like monster, like, Creature from the Black Lagoon? You like vampire, Dracula type of horror movies? You like the slasher films, like Prom Night, Terror Train, Halloween, Happy Birthday to Me, The Prowler, He Knows You're Alone? You like slasher films? You like zombie films? You like monster films like Godzilla, Ghidorah, Rodan, Mothra, King Kong? There's obviously several types of genres of horror in the horror field. But I noticed just a lot of slasher films in 1981. So let's see what 1982 had in store. But let me know what your favorite horror films were of 1981. Obviously, maybe my list is not all inclusive, although I do believe it is. So if there's any films that you remember that I left out that were pretty popular, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. But if you're just going to pick a random movie, oh, Tony, you forgot this film, but you've never seen it, and no one's ever heard of it, that's not going to count, because you're coming here because I have all the films of every... I'm covering all the films of every year. I have all the films of every year that were released in 1980, 81, and so on. So you come to me for all the... I'm just joking. I love having fun with all of you, alright? So those were the best horror films of 1981. Stay tuned for the best horror films of 1982. And this is already... whenever you watch this, you may watch this video well after Halloween, but these videos are coming out before Halloween so that you can get into the feel of it, because a lot of people love, like me, I love watching marathon of horror movies. And there are several movies that many of us don't know about, or never knew about, or never seen. Many of these films can be found online on YouTube and or other online services with streaming services. So if you find a title that I'm giving you, you never heard of, but it piques your interest, by all means look for it. There's several movies I haven't seen that I want to see, and so I look for them. I look for YouTube to see if someone uploaded it, and then I'll go on my streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, Paramount, Vudu, Fangora, whatever is out there. There's always going to be horror movies that none of us have seen or have yet to be seen. So those were the best horror movies of 1981. Stay tuned for the best horror films of 1982. Alright, hope we're getting into the scary season of Halloween. And whenever you watch this video, you may watch this video in November, December, January, whatever, it's still horror, and it gets you in that horror feeling. I love scary movies. A lot of people like scary movies. Some people don't care for them. They don't want to be scared, or they're not into it. But I love horror films. It's my favorite genre. And it's just something about being scared, tense, jump scares, wishing for people to be killed, can't believe people are being killed, the gore, the plots, the terrible acting, good suspense. We all love it. There's something about horror films that we all love personal. We all feel things differently as a horror fans, right? So I'm just another horror fan talking to you guys who are also horror fans, all right? So thanks for joining me, and stay tuned for the best horror films of 1982 coming up. And whenever you watch these videos, the horror films of any year, decade, picture yourself around Halloween, because these are being released right now before Halloween. Alright? Thanks everybody. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you all in the next video.